Good afternoon and welcome to our RSK Biocensus First Thursday Club for June. I'm Gavin Wilson, I'm a director in RSK Biocensus. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our speakers today, Jenny Hughes and Sydney Hougrand, who are going to speak to us on something that's very relevant to everyone, the issue of greenwashing and how to spot it. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we carry on. The microphones will be muted throughout the presentation, but if you do want to ask a question, then you can do that via the question box on your screen. And we'd really encourage you to do that because there'll be time at the end for further discussion. Shortly after the end of the talk, you'll be sent a short questionnaire. And if you do have a few minutes to provide us with a bit of feedback, we'd really appreciate it because it helps us to shape these seminars in the future. Okay, by way of introduction, Jenny is a director in Nature Positive, which is a sister company to RSK Biocensus. She has 10 years experience helping businesses put sustainability into practice, including advising on climate change, nature and social value initiatives. In Nature Positive, Jenny supports businesses on their sustainability journeys, including undertaking materiality assessments for large multinational corporations, developing sustainability frameworks and strategies through to reporting and ESG disclosures. Sid is a senior environmental consultant with Nature Positive and has worked in the environmental sector since 2016, both in the United States and the UK. Sid joined RSK in 2018 and works on a wide range of projects helping clients to deliver sustainable outcomes. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jenny and Sid to tell us about spotting greenwashing, awareness and avoidance tactics. So over to you, Jenny and Sid.
Thanks, Gavin. Okay, we'll just turn our cameras off and we'll get on with the presentation. So in today's talk, we're going to give you an introduction and definitions of greenwashing and what it means. We're then going to talk a little bit about why businesses would potentially greenwash. What are the incentives for them taking action to greenwash? And then we're going to talk a bit about the different stakeholders who are developing a backlash against greenwashing. What are regulators doing? What are NGOs and activists doing in this space? We'll take a deep dive on some corporate examples, and then we'll talk about two topics in a bit more detail, carbon and nature, before finally really focusing in on what can we do about greenwashing? How do you avoid it? And how do you make sustainability progress in your daily lives, but also through your business action? So I'll pass over to Sid now, who's going to crack on and talk about what is greenwashing.
So, what is greenwashing and why do people do it? Whilst I don't typically like reading from a slide, definitions kind of call for it. Greenwashing has been defined by Client Earth as the use of advertising and public messaging to appear more climate friendly and environmentally sustainable than a company really is. It's also a technique used by certain companies to distract consumers from the fact that their business model and activities usually do a lot of environmental harm and damage. In short, this is seen as a way for companies to sell their products as sustainable, even though they likely aren't. This little picture is from the Planet Tracker, and they define greenwashing as a many-headed beast or a hydra. They have 6 different definitions for greenwashing. Green crowding, which is built on the notion that hiding amongst a crowd of other corporates can keep environmentally damaging approaches hidden. Green lighting describes how companies shine a spotlight on green credentials in order to draw attention away from their environmentally damaging activities. Examples include manufacturers showcasing decarbonization, even as plastic pollution and resource use expands. Green shifting refers to when companies try and shift the blame up or down the value chain, usually towards us consumers. Green labeling is a practice where marketing departments mislead through advertisements by claiming something is green, like H&M's green labels or Coke marketing their natural sugar Coke as green. Green rinsing is when a company regularly changes climate and sustainability targets before they've been achieved. So Planet Tracker highlights Coca-Cola and PepsiCo as 2 very prominent examples. And finally, green hushing refers to corporates underreporting or even hiding their sustainability data and performance to avoid stakeholder scrutiny.
Thanks, Sid. So now to talk a little bit more about why businesses could be incentivized to greenwash. And spoiler alert, there's going to be a poll in this section, so we're really looking forward to your thoughts. So keep an eye on the right-hand side of your screens, and a poll should pop up. So thankfully, we're now in an era where taking sustainability action could even be seen as cool. It could be seen as really good to do. There's huge recognition of the issues that we're facing as a planet. And now businesses are being challenged to take better action, whether it's to improve their impacts on the environment or on communities and people. So businesses could be incentivized to greenwash because making their products more attractive to consumers, it can attract employees and investors. They're increasingly looking for companies with strong sustainability credentials. And it's worth noting that sometimes greenwashing isn't exactly illegal. There are some loopholes, but as we'll come on to shortly, regulators and other actors are cracking down on this. Next slide, please. So let's look at some numbers. So in relation to investment, the last 2 years alone have seen a growth of 15% in sustainable investment interest. And by the beginning of 2020, the value of sustainable investment in major financial markets stood at 35.3 trillion. So that's huge, and it now accounts for over 36% of all professionally managed assets across the US, Canada, Japan, Australasia, and Europe. So there's huge interest and money being moved into sustainable investments. Sustainability is also rising up the pensions agenda because of changing laws, guidance, and demand from pension scheme members and other stakeholders. There's been lots of famous examples in the news of lobbying for pensions and universities, for example, to divest from fossil fuel investments. The incentive is therefore very strong for companies to demonstrate their sustainability credentials. Companies with strong ESG credentials can attract a valuation premium, and it can also result in lower interest rates on loans. Greenwashing could artificially inflate companies' stock as customers and investors divert spending power to companies with the best eco-credentials. So what about consumers? So here's a question for you. Do sustainability considerations affect your spending, investing, and buying habits? Please take part in the poll and select the option which best aligns with your values and actions. We'll just give you a minute or so to see what comes in. Great, we're now at 75% voted, so we'll just leave it for 30 more seconds maybe. Okay, great, let's go to the results. So we had 21% of you saying that yes, you always consider this for decisions in purchasing, and a resounding 63%, yes, I often consider sustainability considerations and it affects some decisions. I'd happily say that I think I also stand in that bracket, but sometimes it's difficult and not possible to make a sort of environmentally conscious decision. So let's look a little bit at some broader evidence on the next slide. So just on the right-hand side of this diagram is an interesting stat that searches for sustainable brands has increased by almost 400% in the last 5 years. Consumers care more about sustainability issues now. And on the right-hand side, we've got some examples of surveys and growing evidence on consumers and how they put their principles into practice when buying. A Forbes study found that 88% of consumers will be more loyal to a company that supports social and environmental issues. And an Accenture survey found that 83% of consumers believe it's important or extremely important for companies to have a positive impact by designing products intended for reuse or recycling. Back to you, Sid.
Thank you, Jenny. So there's equally incentive to silence the science around climate change and undertake strategic opposition. There are companies that have been actively campaigning against climate policies since the late 70s. One historic example, and a very well-known example, is seen in ExxonMobil, who reportedly knew about climate change since 1977 and actively campaigned against that science. The graphic here is from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, which has mapped companies' climate policy and engagement in terms of leadership and opposition. Dylan Tanner, executive director and co-founder of the Influence Map, which is what this is, notes that there are numbers of companies that are key members of climate policy groups with misaligned actions. He notes that this misalignment persists because companies tend to focus their strategic lobbying on a small number of issues that are ultimately going to affect their survival. According to the study, there are a significant number of companies that are on the opposition side of climate policy.
Thanks, Sid. So hopefully that built up a good picture of what potentially might incentivize greenwashing by companies. But what are stakeholders doing to stop greenwashing? So there are a range of actors and organizations making changes to crack down on and prevent greenwashing. Firstly, worldwide, regulators are tightening up on greenwashing to protect consumers, business, and market integrity. In the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority have been investigating how products and services claiming to be eco-friendly are being marketed. And back in 2021, they published guidance for businesses making environmental claims. It's definitely worth a look. In March 2023, the European Commission proposed a new Green Claims Directive to address greenwashing. And in the US, the Federal Trade Commission announced last month that they were revising their green guides. So next, on to standard setters and raters. Sustainability accreditations and standards for businesses are becoming much more comprehensive. B Corps is now quite famous and a growing certification for businesses. It was often seen as best practice certification for sustainability. However, last year, the credentials of some B Corps members attracted critical scrutiny. In June last year, concerns were raised by 30 companies over some member certification. For example, for Nespresso, among the issues raised were with the levels of waste generated by single-use plastics and the alleged use of child labour by some suppliers. And there were other members that the concerns were raised about too. B Corps has now publicised they're making major adjustments to its certification criteria to make it even more challenging for businesses to meet the criteria. EcoVadis is another example. They consistently raise the bar and their scoring system adapts year on year for their bronze, silver, gold, platinum ratings. NGOs and activists are very taking a strong stance in this space. Greenpeace is historically famous for activism against companies and extractive industries. Client Earth is a newer kid on the block. It was founded only 15 years ago and it's got a rapidly raising profile, and they challenge both government and businesses. They're increasingly taking legal action on companies, for example, for failing to address climate change threats in their stakeholder reporting. We've talked about investors and consumers. So in summary, we're seeing increasing pressure from different stakeholders on companies to transform and act more sustainably. But this diagram highlights the complexity for companies and how they're being measured in sustainability performance and in their environmental, social, and governance requirements. A professor who teaches ESG investing at Duke University shared this image with the tagline, "ESG is easy. All you have to do is understand what every single logo on this market map means." And they then openly mentioned that they had no idea what all of the logos on this image are. So it's very, very complex, and companies are rightfully so under a lot of scrutiny to take action and develop strategies for sustainability. But there's a landscape of very quickly changing benchmarks, definitions, and language. There's an alphabet soup, and in some cases, this could lead to businesses being confused and take risk-averse behaviours. It can lead to greenwashing and, worst of all, inaction. Overall, we need to require and encourage real progress from companies. The next section focuses on some recognised examples of greenwashing, which aren't progress. Later, we'll talk about what companies and individuals can do to make the progress needed.
So next, we're going to look at some corporate examples which illustrate different greenwashing types. But first, I would like to put out a poll and get your thoughts on what the fake greenwashing claim is out of these 4 options. Let's see who can figure it out. I'll give it about 30 more seconds. All right, let's see what the results are. Okay, so it looks like about half of you guys thought it was B, and the remainder are relatively even. So now I suppose I will show you what the answer was. The fake answer was C. So there is no greener meat. But a little bit behind answer B is something that Jenny will talk about.
Yeah, so we just wanted to highlight quite a funny example of greenwashing, which is hopefully quite clear to see why KLM have had to now remove their ads. So they posted an ad saying the KLM crew can save the emissions of 3 households with 1 less pair of underwear. And obviously in the bigger picture of a flight, that proportion of emissions saved would be tiny. And it is a bit ridiculous in our view. So yeah, if you've got any questions on any of those greenwashing claims, we can come back to that in the discussion. Yes. But now on to another example. So HSBC have been criticised and had to remove adverts and posters in bus shelters. These adverts were banned by the Advertising Standards Agency in the UK. And it's interesting to note that since then, HSBC has also made significant changes to their strategy and what activities they're financing. So the advert content was climate change doesn't do borders, neither do rising sea levels. That's why HSBC is aiming to provide up to 1 trillion in financing to help our clients transition to net zero. In other similar adverts, they noted, in the UK, we're helping to plant 2 million trees. Now, what type of greenwashing was this? The Advertising Standards Agency said that the adverts made HSBC seem like it was resulting in positive overall contribution. So this would be green lighting. They were spotlighting green activities such as tree planting whilst drawing attention away from other activities. The ASA took a deeper dive and looked at their annual report and accounts and found that this positive overall contribution was not the case. And HSBC were financing at least 65.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year for oil and gas activities alone, including thermal coal. So by the end of 2022, HSBC had now announced it will stop financing new oil and gas fields as part of its efforts to drive down global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's really good progress. And Europe's largest bank said it made the decision after receiving advice from international energy experts. And back to you, Sid.
Another prominent company that is currently under investigation for greenwashing is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is known internationally as one of the largest polluters of plastics globally. It pumps out 200,000 bottles a minute, an equivalent of 3 million tons of plastic packaging per year, according to the Sierra Club. In June of 2021, the Sierra Club filed a lawsuit alleging false advertising by Coca-Cola and other plastic water bottle manufacturers regarding the recyclability of its plastic bottles. Coca-Cola claims that their bottles are 100% recyclable. However, the Sierra Club alleges that the labels are type 5 plastic, which is not recyclable. in the majority of locations. Big brands like Coca-Cola need to urgently act and put systems in place to shrink their plastic production, such as refill and reuse. In response to this, Coca-Cola has spent millions in advertising for the use of marine plastics as well as their plant-based bottles beginning in 2009 as a means to eliminate virgin plastics. It's worth noting, however, that the plant-based plastics that are being promoted and advertised are predominantly made from sugarcane. According to the WWF, sugarcane is a water-intensive crop that remains in the soil all year long, and as one of the world's thirstiest crops, sugarcane has a significant impact on many environmentally sensitive regions. Historic planting of sugarcane around the world has led to significant impacts on biodiversity. One of the most well-known examples of greenwashing can be seen in fashion. Fast fashion is a term widely accepted in reference to brands that produce significant amounts of clothing in an unsustainable manner, putting profit above planet. In an attempt to push back against negative press surrounding the concept of fast fashion, many large corporations such as H&M, Boohoo, ASOS, Shein have put out quote-unquote sustainable clothing labels, marketing these items as green or conscious to consumers. Some examples of these are the Responsible Edit from ASOS, Boohoo's current Ready for the Future range, and George for Good, the conscious, as well as the Conscious Choice from H&M. All acts of green labeling with adverts that green shift the responsibility of sustainability onto the consumer. Back in September 2021, businesses were put on notice in respect of their obligations under consumer law, and the Competition and Markets Authority plan to carry out a full review of misleading green claims, both on and offline. This latest missive from the CMA puts the fashion retail sector in the center of the CMA's priorities in terms of potential greenwashing. Similar action is also taking place in the EU, particularly in the Netherlands, where the ACM has already carried out an investigation into misleading sustainability claims in the clothing sector. Now we're going to take a deep dive into carbon and nature, starting off with Jenny covering carbon.
Thanks, Sid. Okay, so this case study is really almost an example of how complicated it can be for businesses. And sometimes that actually has some unintended consequences, as you'll shortly find out. So the world of net zero is, oh, sorry, Sid, if you could go back, back one more.
Yep.
Great. So Net Zero Tracker, which is a collaboration of organizations, including Oxford University Net Zero, assesses the status and trends of net zero targets setting across countries, subnational governments, and companies. And in their update last year, they found that companies' progress is very variable. This graph shows net zero targets by sector, and you might not be able to completely see the detail, but up at the top would be 100% companies. So we're still a long way off companies having net zero targets across all sectors. Last June, over a third of the biggest companies had net zero targets, which was up from 1/5 the previous December. However, the study found that 2/3 of net zero targets do not meet minimum procedural standards of robustness. And their report summarized that there was an alarming lack of credibility pervading the entire landscape. And if you just press next, the next graph will pop up. The offsetting debate has recently been very high up in the press since the start of the year. Up until 2021, offsetting was seen as a credible way for companies and their products to get to carbon neutral. And that was kind of seen as best practice, really good thing to do. However, with recent changes and evolutions and new standards coming out, such as the new Science-Based Target Initiative guidance on net zero, the goalposts have shifted significantly. SBTI defines that a 90% reduction in emissions is needed prior to offsetting. So see the purple dots there and the carbon removals and how they come in much later down the journey towards net zero. So under this new definition, lots of corporates have actually withdrawn from carbon offsetting projects. And rightfully, there's a lot of scrutiny over credibility of lots of projects. And for example, whether they're delivering good or even maintaining and protecting forests. A recent example of this was that EasyJet announced they won't invest 25 million in environmental protection projects in the Amazon and in the Ethiopian Bale Mountains. So an unintended consequence for moving the goalposts can be market uncertainty and moving finance away from crucial projects that have good outcomes in terms of carbon and biodiversity. We don't have time to go into this in much more detail now, but it's an extremely emerging market for carbon offset projects, and it's extremely difficult to navigate credibly, and even more so for biodiversity, which leads nicely on to Sid's example.
Yes, it is well understood that ecosystems and biodiversity are in rapid decline due to human activity. Therefore, biodiversity and nature are the new hot topic for businesses, investors, and policymakers, particularly when looking to mitigate climate and carbon-related risk. However, unlike carbon, there are less tried and true metrics for measuring biodiversity or our impact on nature. Ecosystems and biodiversity are not static, they are constantly changing, which makes it challenging to measure progress. However, the lack of consistency in legislation around measuring our impact on nature paves the way for several types of greenwashing. Some examples of this are notably in green labeling, where businesses claim to be sustainably preserving, protecting, or enhancing our natural environment without any way of categorically confirming their actions. The 2021 documentary Seaspiracy brought this into light in a prominent, if very controversial way, discussing dolphin-safe tuna, a green label which makes unsubstantiated claims to sustainable fishing practices. Similarly to carbon, biodiversity offsets are a measurable way to compensate for the impact of a development project by imposing a cost on activities that have an adverse impact on habitats. However, this is an emerging market, so standards are very much emerging for how a company should offset. But there is some positive steps being made. The Science-Based Targets Network is developing science-based targets for nature in addition to their carbon. While still in its infancy, this creates a market for setting credible targets to limit businesses' impact on nature. The majority of the full methodologies will be published in 2024 following the beta trial, which fortunately I've been a part of. Now we can start talking a little bit about some avoidance tactics and making sustainability progress, navigating that due diligence and stopping greenwashing. First, we want to just do an overall avoidance tactics and some genuine action. On a personal level, you could do your research. Does something sound too good to be true? It probably is. That top costs £5 for a reason, and the reason is likely worker exploitation, monocultures, and false advertisements. You could also check yourself. Do you actually need the item that you're looking to purchase, or have you been influenced by some social media or really well-placed advert? Could you get it from a better source? Another thing to look out for is fluffy language. There are so many terms that don't have a clear meaning, such as eco-friendly or natural, which are often greenwashing red flags. On a corporate sort of standpoint for due diligence, corporates can undertake scopes 1, 2, and 3 carbon assessments, which will help identify areas where your company can improve and provide data that can be used to back up any sustainability claims being made. You could pledge to the Science-Based Targets Initiative and set science-based targets for carbon and nature. This is a reputable way to set targets and KPIs and identify a pathway to achieving them. You could also identify other areas that you can improve your sustainability. There are always areas that we can improve in. For example, there are now several companies pledging to pay all of their employees a living wage, which definitely differs from the minimum wage, and setting appropriate KPIs around that. There's also an opportunity to perform due diligence along your supply chain and make some more sustainable choices and avoiding companies which may be greenwashing. Looking at ending greenwashing, companies can focus on the fundamentals, ensuring your marketing team is avoiding inadvertent greenwashing by making claims and advertisements that are clear and easy to understand, so avoiding that fluffy language, and including verifiable sources from credible third parties. You could set SMART targets that are achievable and measurable, which will ensure that your company is not making false or impossible claims. You can put your money where your mouth is. You can set ambitious targets, but you need to ensure that they are achievable and ensure appropriate funding and action is allocated to achieving it. And finally, we can engage with stakeholders and policymakers. Engagement from businesses with credible third-party stakeholders like SBTN, as well as governmental bodies, is crucial to ensuring that your business is not greenwashing, but also ensures that there will be change in legislation further down the line. The more businesses engage, the more likely that greenwashing will end.
Thanks, Sid. And just to elaborate on some of the advice Sid was setting out there for personal and individual action, I put some thoughts on the slide. One of my key messages would be keep it simple. Firstly, you need to step back. You need to figure out where your biggest impacts lie, whether they're positive or negative. There are apps available to help you to do this. There's apps such as Geeky, which is a carbon footprinting app, and it also looks at broader environmental impact. You then need to set goals and take steps to improve. A simple rule, which Sid kind of nicely demonstrated there also, was collaborate and work together to have a bigger impact. And make sure you keep doing your research on an ongoing basis. Things change quickly. There's all sorts of resources out there, such as this book I kind of highlighted on screen called How to Save the World for Free. It's got really easy advice based on lots of different kind of chapters. But if you're not as passionate about sustainability, there's also lots more kind of simple guides out there. And I've highlighted on screen what could be seen as some quick, no regrets actions. Obviously, everyone's lives are quite complicated, but the sort of steps on screen I put there are a really good way of making some progress. Reducing your energy and water use, buy less stuff, be more mindful with your food, travel more sustainably, and look at your banking and finances, which is usually an area where you could actually have quite a significant impact. There's all sorts of apps out there as well. And I think I really like this kind of quote, which was actually sitting above this mural in the right-hand corner of my screen at my local supermarket for over a year. It says, "No change too small." Don't be afraid to make one small change. It will then become easier to make those bigger, more difficult changes. And on to the next slide, just some steps for businesses. So this is an extract from our guide that Nature Positive published on sustainability for small and medium businesses. And we've set out a kind of a roadmap for 7 steps for sustainability. And lots of the sort of points that Sid was making there are kind of embedded in these different steps and help you to take robust action. It really starts with assessing the issues that affect your business and sector. There's usually lots of different resources out there which help simplify that. And it's really important to set your vision and statement of intent. But further down the line, once you've set your vision, you really need to get into the numbers, the nitty-gritty. And it's really very important to make sure you're setting robust and measurable targets, taking short-term action whilst working towards longer-term goals. And of course, reporting and monitoring your progress is crucial to demonstrate your credibility. So just to end on some final thoughts from us, from this complex and murky world of greenwashing, what's our kind of key thoughts coming out of this? Well, Sid and I had a quick chat before the webinar, and we thought that these kind of points are really sum up about what we think is needed. For businesses, progress doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be ambitious. We're facing really critical challenges as a planet, and we really do need to take quick action. So therefore, we need ambitious action. Sid came up with this one: inaction is worse than inaccurate action. I completely agree. We're currently at the stage where we're at risk of creating a culture of fear for businesses, which will result in green hushing or inaction. Again, this really highlights how businesses can just crack on and take action today. And finally, we need to create a sustainability culture of accountability. But we also really need to keep our focus on positive outcomes, judging businesses on how they're contributing to a better future for people and for planet. So thank you so much for listening. We're looking forward to the discussion and your questions. And please add your thoughts on what your takeaways are from the webinar in the comments box. Just turn our cameras on. Hopefully Gav is there. Yeah.
Hello, there we are, we're back. Well, Okay, thank you very much to both of you for that. So that's a really excellent and pretty eye-opening overview, I think, of what is just such an incredibly important, issue for everyone to be aware of. So we've got a little bit of time and we've got a couple of questions, and so we'll pick some of these now. So the first one here is about complexity. So given the complexity of the landscape, and Jenny, I think you called it alphabet soup, what would your advice be to a company that's, with its heart in the right place, it's trying to engage, but it's not sure where to start?
I'll take that one. Well, I suppose the first one would be going back to that nice little roadmap. Heart in the right place. You need to assess where your impacts really are. Some companies might not recognize, for example, that they have significant biodiversity impacts or that it's a material issue. And there's all this new evidence around how companies do have those impacts. One thing we haven't talked today is about social sustainability as well. Companies have a lot of potential to take positive action in that sphere. So there's all sorts of resources out there for companies to assess their own impacts. The Global Reporting Initiative has got all sorts of standards on this. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are a really handy tool. But if you're feeling stuck, then I would absolutely recommend engaging an expert on this topic. Sid, I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
No, nothing to add other than the fact that there are so many different tools available and so many different experts available as well. And adding on to sort of that social aspect, I think that it's also very important to consider biodiversity. So even small changes with regard to things like land take or looking at your office footprint even can make a really big difference. So there's so many things.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, next one is, so it's becoming an increasingly influential and impactful business risk and opportunity. To what degree do we feel that our businesses are honest with themselves as to the degree or otherwise of in-house expertise in identifying what good looks like in this space?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
It is a tough one, yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm just trying to find the full text because it was long.
Can you see it?
To what degree do we feel our businesses are being honest with themselves as to the degree of expertise in this space?
Ooh.
I think it depends which businesses you're asking about.
Yes, yeah.
If we're talking about some big global corporations and businesses, I think it's very interesting to think about the size of sustainability teams and the expertise in-house. There was a study, and apologies, I won't reference it correctly, but it was a study last year talking about the size of sustainability teams being about an average of 6 for some big global corporations. And I think if you've got 6 people, they can be wonderful sustainability kind of professionals, but I think that's a good demonstrator of how you might not necessarily have that in-house expertise on specific issues.
Right, particularly if it's a global company where there's going to be different sustainability issues in different areas, whether it's socially, environmentally, or carbon-based. Not every country has the same laws and standards, and not every country is facing the same climate change issues. So it's definitely something that I think lacks a little bit of honesty around that. But there's a lot of evidence of companies taking steps towards being more honest with themselves, mainly because of the changing legislation, particularly around reporting for carbon, and soon to be more reporting around nature. So there's a push to be more honest, but at the moment, I think that that's a very difficult question to answer.
Okay.
I think
Fab, thank you.
Just to add one point, it's that, so one side is that yes, there may be some issues where you should absolutely be looking for outside advice and resources on specific sustainability topics, but also at the same time, you should also think that your employees are experts in your business, and applying a sustainability lens to something is not necessarily a very complex technical topic. It's sometimes about asking sensible questions about how to reduce resource use, how to do something with lower carbon emissions, how to provide a positive impact to community. So actually a lot of the ideas around sustainability and having a positive impact can come from your employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and so we have one here about the sort of it was one of the slides near the end of your presentation about personal due diligence. So it's encouraging that individuals are increasingly aspiring to be sustainable consumers. But what would you advise is the easiest step for people, the easiest way for people to spot greenwashing sort of during their shopping, effectively, really, in their lives?
I don't know if Sid, you're going to take that one.
So that's a really good question. So looking at sort of personal due diligence when you're out shopping, I think that the key thing to look out for is some of those red flags that we discussed. So fluffy language. If you can't find out exactly what eco-friendly or natural means on the label, then I don't think that it really qualifies as that. However, there are things that say eco-friendly, and then when you flip it over, it says that it's safe for aquatic life. So I'm talking mainly about soaps and detergents in this, and that's just a quick example off the top of my head. But there are things to look out for that are more credible than others. So one thing that you can also do that I often do is I have little apps on my phone like Too Good For You, which an app where you can look up the sustainability credentials of a given clothing company, because let's be honest, we can't always make it to charity shops. It's not always convenient, can't always find the right size. And for me, jeans are really hard to find, and a good charity shop, as awesome as it is, not always great. But Too Good For You has helped me find more sustainable clothing companies that suit my body type and make me feel good. So it's a nice way to kind of approach shopping from a different perspective, I suppose. I also shop a lot on Vinted because I'm a mom of two, and sometimes you just gotta go for convenience.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, there's a question here that asks, do you have any thoughts on how to change people's behaviour who might not be conscious or aware of these greenwashing issues? I don't know whether, Jenny, you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're talking about individuals, I think this is where this green shifting issue comes in. And actually, I really don't think it should be on individuals to have to change their behavior. I think that is really about companies doing the right thing and clearly explaining their products. It shouldn't be on people to have to wade through research. Obviously, Sid's provided some really good ways in which you can relatively quickly find out things. But I do think that that generally should be about companies. However, if we're talking about changing people's behavior in general, I do feel like education is absolutely crucial, and building this into school curriculums and things like that, making it really simple for people to understand what 1 mile traveled in a car is in relation to carbon compared to walking, for example. There's lots of, I think there's generally not as much awareness as we'd hope about how behavior can influence the environment.
Great. Sydney, is there anything you want to add to that? Are you happy with that?
No, I very strongly agree that the onus should be on companies rather than on people, because people are always going to be busy. We're always going to search for convenience, and a company should not be punishing the consumer for requiring the items that they're selling to them with very clever advertisements.
Agreed.
But education, so important. And I quite like the nagging principle, that the earlier down that you teach children, the more that you're more likely to see a change in parents. So integrating it into school curriculums would be a really good way.
Agreed. So it's slightly related to that then. This will be our last question because we're running out of time. Is there an organisation dedicated to auditing organisations on their marketing and finding greenwashing where it exists?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in the UK that's the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong now, the Competition and Markets Authority.
Yeah,
and the
CMA.
Advertising Standards Agency.
Okay. So there is, yeah. That's fine.
Okay, at one point, I know we're running out of time, Gab, but I just want to make it really clear. Any examples that we've referenced in this presentation are of publicly available kind of research around greenwashing. It's not the research of ourselves. And I'd also just like to highlight, we're very conscious of the journeys that big corporates are on. I've seen examples where corporates are being slated for actions and it's not necessarily accurate or what I would judge as fair. So I do think there's a flip side, and sometimes companies are under a lot of pressure. But yeah, if you are interested in any of the detailed examples, we'd be more than happy to point you in the direction of where the sources of the information have come from.
Great, Fab, thank you very much. And I think that really brings us to the end. We've slightly run over. There's one or two outstanding questions, and we'll do our best to get back to the people who put them in there after this. So we'll wrap up now. Just a quick moment just to say, please, if you have a moment to fill in our questionnaire when you receive it. And really that just leaves me to say thank you very much again to Jenny and Sydney, and to everyone for tuning in. And finally, just to say that our next First Thursday Club session is on July the 6th, and the details of that presentation will follow shortly. And on that note, I wish you all a good afternoon. Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.